All right, let's look at how to plot a graph using Google Sheets. First, you'll need some data to plot. If you just went insert chart, it's called a chart rather than a graph. You see there's no data there. Now you could, from this point, actually add the data. You could select them. But I personally think it's easier just to select the data first and then tell it to insert the chart. So here I've just got a table of some results. So we're looking at mass and time. So maybe this is a hypothetical experiment where the mass of something was measured over time. So it started at 200 kilograms, and after 6 days it was down to 20 kilograms. So this is the data that I want to plot on my graph, on my chart. So once I've selected it, then I can go insert chart, and straight away I have something that's looking not too bad. Okay, now the first thing we need to do is look at different chart types. So let's make that a bit bigger. Over on the right hand side, at the moment this is a line chart. Now a lot of students tend to favor this sort of thing, a column chart. We don't want this. When you're asked in science to plot a graph of your results, it's generally going to be with a line. It's going to be a line chart. So if you're partial to this sort of chart that's in front of you, the column chart, yeah, stop doing that, unless otherwise specified. If you're told to specifically draw a histogram or a column chart or a bar chart, etc., then sure, go for it. If you're just asked in science to plot your data, realize that it will often be a chart, something like this, a line chart. Now, this is actually not the sort of thing we want, even though this is the line chart and it's got a line and that's what he said. But actually, we want to see our data points. And at the moment, we can't really. Like, we can see whether, hopefully you can see where my mouse is. Where I'm pointing, there's a data point there. We can see it quite easily because the line is changing direction. There's another one there, it's changing direction. But we want to actually see the different data points. So what we need to do is actually select on the chart type. We need to go down and choose scatter chart. Okay, so there's a whole lot of different sorts of charts you can select, and we want this one, scatter, because when we put this one on, now we see the data points. And unfortunately we've lost the line, but that's fine. We'll get that back in a sec. But we can see the data, which is actually quite important. If you were plotting a graph by hand, you would, of course, always plot the data points. Well, the same thing when you're doing it on computer, you should always show the data points. Now, let's look at the axes. The x-axis, this has automatically been labeled as the mass, going from 0 up to 200 kilograms. And the y-axis, the time, going from 0 to 6 days. That's not what we wanted at all. What I suggested at the start in this hypothetical experiment was I was measuring the mass of something each day, and we can see over time it got less and less massive. Now the x-axis is always the thing that you know, right? The thing that you know. In this case, that's the time, because I know it's going to be day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. I know I'm going to measure it every day. What I didn't know in this hypothetical experiment was what the mass was going to be. I didn't know that. Okay, so I had to measure it to find out. The thing that you don't know, that you have to measure to find out, always goes up the side. That is what the y-axis always is. Okay, so along the bottom, the horizontal x-axis is always the thing you know, and up the side, the vertical, the y-axis is always what you measure. So I need to actually switch these two around. So that's done over here. X-axis over on the menu here on the right, x-axis is currently listed as mass, and it's put the mass there. So if I click that, I can now change it to time, because I want time along the bottom because I know it, and I want mass up the side because I don't know it, I have to measure it. So the x-axis, I'm going to switch to time. The other one, I need to switch to the y-axis. Unfortunately, it's not called y-axis, it's called series. So we've got one called x-axis, but we've got another one called series. Think of that as the y-axis, and at the moment it's set to time. So if we just click on that, we can change it to mass. So there you go, I've switched the data around. So now the time is along the bottom, going from 0 to 6 days, and the mass up the side, going from 0 up to 200 kilograms. Now you'll note the axis labels actually haven't changed. Okay, so that still says time, and yet it's using the data from 0 to 200 of the mass. And down here on the X, it says mass, but it's using the data of the days up to 6. So the data has actually switched, but we still need to change the axis labels. So let's go and do that now. We go back to the menu. Over on the right is Customize. And in Customize, we can go down to Chart and Axis Titles. So at the moment it's on the vertical axis title, and we want to change that because it's actually not time, it's the mass in kilograms. Remember, always kilograms. I said that's better. Always put your units. And that has now changed on the chart. So as you make changes through the this editor, the menu over on the right, they happen pretty much straight away. If we switch this to the horizontal, it's currently listed as the mass in kilograms. Well, that's not right. It should be the time in days. And there you go, it's just changed already. Maybe the chart title. We could change this if we want. Graph of time versus mass. Yeah, that's fine. We could do other changes as well. Maybe we want to change the font, maybe center it. So we can edit our chart as we need to. Same thing actually from the axis. The axes, we could change those if we want. Make it bold, etc. So you can play around with it as you see fit. Make that wide as well. Now, we're not done yet because we still need to get our line. Now, for the line, under this Customize menu over on the right, we want to go to Series. And if you go down in the series, what we can do here is find these three things: error bars, data labels, trend line. The one you want is a trend line. This is what we look for in science. What we don't want is a dot-to-dot picture where you've just joined up all the data points. Okay, now when I first did insert chart, that's essentially what it came up with. The data points weren't shown, but the line was actually joining the data points in a sort of a zigzag fashion. That's not necessarily what we want. In science, what we often want is the trend. We want to see the general trend. In this case, the trend is as time progresses, the mass decreases. Okay, so we started at time equals 0 and the mass was 200 kilograms. By the end, time equals 6 days and the mass was only 20 kilograms. Okay, but the general trend is it comes down. Think of it as sort of, the trend line is sort of like the average of what's actually happening. Now you'll note, I'm just going to play around with it, make it a red one. You'll note not all the data points lie on the trend line. This doesn't, and this doesn't. And I did this on purpose actually, because if we look back to the original data, we started at 200. You see it comes down by 30, comes down by 30, comes down by 30, would have been 110, but actually it didn't come down by 30. That's a bit higher. Okay, so I have actually made that data point a bit higher so that you can see that it actually lies above the trend line now. Okay, the data points don't have to be on the line. We don't want a dot-to-dot picture type scenario where you have to join all the dots up. You don't at all. Now at the moment this is a linear trend line. We have other options. Linear makes sense at the moment because we can see it does come down pretty steadily. As I said, it's sort of by about 30 each time. So it's a pretty steady linear drop of the trend line there. So we'll just leave it at that for now. For different types of graph, like over time, if the mass halved, if it went from 200 to 100 and then to 50 and then to 25 and then to 12.5, well, that's not a linear change, is it? So we'd probably want to put exponential on for that one. Okay, so it depends what the data is like, what type of trend line you want. But at the moment for this, we just leave it as linear. And there we go. I've plotted my graph. Well, Google did it for me, which was quite nice of it. What we can do now is just copy the graph and paste it into a Google document. Now, when we do that, just Control V for paste, we've got a couple of options here. We can paste unlinked, and that will just put the graph in, no problem, there it is. I may have wanted to increase the size the axes labels, because with the font being quite bold, but the font size being quite small, it's a little bit hard to read. So I could have played around with that. But this essentially is just pasted as an image. Okay, and I can just treat it as such. The other option, however, is I could paste it linked to the spreadsheet. Now, the bonus of this is that you could go back and change the data if you needed to. If this is a complete final product and you don't need to, you could just paste unlinked. But otherwise, if you paste the chart linked to spreadsheet, you'll notice it looks exactly the same. Right? It is pasted as an image that you can move around as you need to. Okay. However, if you did actually need to make some changes, you can go back to your spreadsheet. And let's make a change. Let's say this wasn't 120. Let's say it dropped below the line. Let's say it was 83. Okay, so as soon as I hit enter and change that to 83, you can see the data point did actually come down. Okay, maybe this was 168. This one was 57. Maybe actually at the end it went up. Let's say it got more massive at the end, it went to 74. Okay, so the chart has changed. As soon as I make these changes, it changes in real time on the spreadsheet. Now back in the Google Doc where I had pasted it, it hasn't changed, but here we go. I now have an update option. If I update that, then it's updated, okay, to what the new data has changed, because maybe I made a mistake and I typed in the numbers wrong, and then when I realized later on, I came back and fixed it up. Well, even though it was pasted in the document, I can update it to reflect the changes made. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, how to make a graph or a chart using Google Spreadsheet.